Welcome back. Now on to this. The Competition Commission has launched an investigation into Johnson & Johnson over what it says are excessive prices it charges South Africa for key TB drug Bedaquiline. The American pharmaceutical giant has also faced heavy criticism over its patent strategies for that same drug. Compared to other middle to lower income countries, South Africa has one of the highest TB rates in the world. For more on this conversation, we're now joined by Mia Malan, the editor-in-chief at Bhekisisa Centre for Health Journalism. Mia, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. Now, you have written extensively on the investigation and the abuse by J&J. Share with us some of your thoughts and findings in relation to this matter.
Thank you very much, Katlehu. So, the issue of drug companies overpricing medicines is not new. I think what is a special issue in the case of TB is that TB largely affects poorer countries. So it's not really an issue in Western countries any longer, which means that it affects countries which really can't afford prices that high. Now, the issue with South Africa's Bedaquiline at the moment is that from the 1st of October, we will be paying double that of many other countries for a drug course. So you have to take Bedaquiline for 6 months, and it treats a type of TB that doesn't respond to normal treatment. It's called drug-resistant TB. Now, this is quite a revolutionary drug. If you compare to previous treatments, then those treatments had very low cure rates because people had to take very painful injections for up to 2 years. And with Bedaquiline, they only have to take treatment for 6 months, far fewer side effects. So it's something that we desperately need. Now, the reason we, as things stand now, will be paying more than many other countries is that many other countries can use a special mechanism called the Global Drug Facility, which uses pooled procurement. So they buy large amounts of drugs on behalf of many countries, and they negotiate with a drug company and then get it for cheaper. Countries like South Africa, which has open tender systems, which means we can't go and use pooled procurement systems. We can't go through that system, so we buy our drugs directly from Johnson & Johnson. And the argument is we've been buying drugs for so long, Bedaquiline inclusive, and why can't we also get that price of the Global Drug Facility, which is 2,400 rands around there? Why would we be paying 5,500 rands, which is even slightly higher than what we've been paying up until now?
Does this then speak to a policy change in terms of how we do things in South Africa for us to be able to become a part of that pooled procurement process in order for us to be able to access these drugs that we so desperately need in a country with such high TB rates at affordable prices?
So if we would want to be part of that Global Drug Facility, we would have to adjust our law. So it would be quite a big process to do. And it's not just South Africa which has open tender systems. Many other countries have it. And the reason they are open tender systems is to increase transparency and to decrease corruption. So it's there for a reason. I think the larger issue is that why can't we buy it for a cheaper price? But the other issue is the fact that Johnson & Johnson has extended their patent, which blocks cheaper generic drugs from entering South Africa in the case of Bedaquiline. So what has happened is a patent is normally valid for about 20 years. And that patent is granted to a company so that they can recover their research and development costs and then have a monopoly on that drug, so no one would be allowed to make the drug while they have that patent. Now, the patent for Bedaquiline compounds expired in South Africa in July this year. And what Johnson & Johnson then did is they asked for it to be extended. And that practice is part of what the Competition Commission would be investigating. Often what happens is that drug companies get around the 20 years in the sense that they make very trivial or very small changes to drugs and then just re-register it. And the Competition Commission will be looking at that extend the patent? Is it really necessary? Was it just trivial changes or not? And or was it really done, to block generics from entering South Africa? So that evergreening is a big issue. But another issue, a larger issue in South Africa, is that our intellectual property law, there's been activists going on for it for years, because it allows this evergreening practice to happen because there's not proper scrutiny of applications to be extended of patents. And we can really learn from a country like India. Johnson & Johnson applied in India to also extend their patent, and it was rejected in March because they do proper scrutiny. So it's also a larger issue of our law that needs to be reformed or better applied so that we do scrutinize these applications better.
And speaking of those evergreen patents, what effect do they have essentially on the purse of South Africa's Department of Health with regards to us then having to acquire these drugs for a longer period of time at those prices?
Well, it essentially means that we pay double what we should be paying for the drug, because if you look at cheaper generics, they are about half of the price that we currently pay. So it essentially prevents us from buying cheaper drugs and making it more available. So evergreening is a practice that really needs to be addressed. And if you look at other diseases, HIV, if you go back to the late 90s or the mid-90s when ARVs were unaffordable and we could also not import generics, it was a huge problem, but there was lots of activism around it. And because we got the price down and we, had special rights to also bring in some cases, in some countries, generics, it meant that hundreds of thousands of lives were saved. So we've got all the proof from the other big pandemic in our country, HIV, and we really need to apply those lessons to TB as well.
Speaking of applying lessons, what are we to make of such bullying tactics by large pharmaceutical companies? And does this open a window into other essential medications, such as vaccines, that we possibly could be facing other unethical practice and overpricing that we recently received from Johnson & Johnson?
I think the big issue is transparency. Pharmaceutical companies have a long history of not being open about how much did they spend to produce a drug and what are the costs that they really need to recover. So it really is a big issue around transparency, and that is something that we do need to address.
Mia, earlier on you mentioned the evergreening of patents in order for pharmaceutical companies to make back what investments they've made in producing the drug. And we know that in the making of Bedaquiline, it was not only the investment of Johnson & Johnson, but public funds from the USA were utilized in its formation, as well as clinical trials that were run in South Africa to prove its efficacy. What are we to make of Johnson & Johnson's morality, knowing that these collaborative efforts were put in place to create these drugs, and it was not just the investment of Johnson & Johnson?
Absolutely. There was large public investments, and these drugs were tested on South Africans. So that has been a long-standing issue in the pharmaceutical world. Or the criticism against them is that you get so much from middle-income countries. You test the drugs in our countries, and when they then come onto the market, you price them for us to afford them. And essentially, it doesn't matter if you have all the best medicine in the world. If it doesn't reach the people who need it most, then it is not of much use at the end of the day. And that extends, it's not just Johnson & Johnson, it's all drug companies who have this practice. If you, for instance, look at the HIV prevention injection, that is a new product on the market, an injection that you can take once every 6 months. The drug company that produces that with healthcare, the injection is called Cap-LA. It's also unaffordable at the moment for Africa. The irony is that an injection like that is available at the moment in a country like the United States with very low HIV infection rates compared to Africa. But Africa, where it's most needed, can't afford it, and it was tested here, not just in South Africa, in many African countries. If it wasn't for those clinical trials, we wouldn't have known that it works. But now it's outpriced and we can't afford it.
All right, Mia, very quickly as we wrap up, what outcome are we hoping to get after this investigation?
I think what activists and many journalists, but mainly activists, are really hoping for is that the investigation will help to regulate the conduct of pharmaceutical companies in South Africa better, essentially for them to become more transparent and for their conduct to be scrutinized when it comes to practices like evergreening. There's no finding yet, so we can't yet accuse J&J of evergreening. We would have to wait for this investigation to be concluded. But in addition to that, I also hope that this investigation will highlight the role that the loopholes in our intellectual property laws play to allow pharmaceutical companies to, in effect, get away with murder.
All right, Mia, thank you so much for your time and for your insights this evening. That was Bhekisisa Centre for Health Journalism Editor-in-Chief, Mia Malan, speaking to us there about the Competition Commission's probe into Johnson & Johnson.